The year is 2030. Picture yourself sitting in a cold, quiet war room as the supreme commander of a hostile superpower. Your admirals are confident. Your generals are hungry. Your politicians are finally aligned. On the table is the unthinkable, an invasion of the United States of America. And for this thought experiment, we're going to remove the usual excuses. No U.S. Navy, no Air Force, no Marines, no drones, no carriers, no stealth bombers. Just the land, the people, and the infrastructure. The military is gone. Poof. So you smile. Because in your mind, war is simple. Land troops, seize capital, control roads, occupy industry, end resistance. Plant the flag, take the photos, declare victory. But the moment you say the words invade the United States, you don't start a war against an army. You start a war against distance, against geography, against supply chains, against a continent that behaves like a machine built to break invaders, and against a civilian population large enough, armed enough, and decentralized enough to turn every mile you advance into a slow-motion catastrophe. Today, we're not talking about nukes. We're not talking about fighter jets. We're talking about the nightmare underneath the headlines, the economic and geographic reality that makes the United States one of the hardest places on Earth to conquer. Not hard like a tough campaign. Hard like your spreadsheet starts screaming. You begin where every invasion begins, getting there. From the east, you face the Atlantic. From the west, you face the Pacific. These aren't just oceans. They're liquid deserts where every pound of food, fuel, ammunition, medicine, spare parts, and replacement vehicles has to travel thousands of miles before it can even touch land. This is the part people forget. Armies don't move on courage. They move on calories, diesel, and maintenance schedules. Crossing a narrow channel is already an industrial miracle. Now, stretch that distance into the thousands of miles. Every extra day at sea is more wear on engines, more sickness, more fatigue, more broken equipment, more time for storms to reshuffle your fleet like dice in a cup. And even if you somehow manage to transport a serious force, let's say hundreds of thousands of troops, what exactly are you transporting them with? Not just troop ships. You need rolling warehouses. You need floating fuel depots. You need repair capacity. You need redundancy because the ocean does not care about your plans. Your logistics become a living creature and it is always hungry. Then comes the first cruel joke: staging. Most successful invasions rely on nearby buildup. A friendly neighbor, a massive stockpile just across the border, short lines, rapid reinforcement, constant resupply. So where is your staging ground for America? There isn't one. There's no comfortable doorstep, no convenient platform close enough to sustain a continuous flow of heavy equipment. Even the islands that look useful on a map still leave you painfully far away from the mainland. And distance isn't just inconvenient, it's a multiplier of failure. One storm delays a convoy. One mechanical issue cascades into shortages. One disruption becomes a chain reaction. And here's the funniest part. In the darkest way, you can't hide any of it. The shipping, the fuel, the buildup, moving an invasion-sized force is so large, it becomes visible long before it becomes dangerous. It's not a secret plan. It's a months-long parade of metal that announces itself to the world. So by the time your first boot is even approaching sand, you're already fighting the first battle. Can you keep feeding the operation before it collapses under its own weight? Now let's say you do the impossible. You arrive. Where do you land? People imagine beaches like a movie. Smooth sand, open space, easy unloading, a clean march inland. Reality is uglier. Coasts are cluttered, urbanized, industrial, and constrained. The places where heavy equipment can be offloaded efficiently, deep water ports with the right infrastructure, are not infinite. They are choke points. Few entrances, few routes, easy to disrupt, hard to replace. And even if you avoid the ports and try to go around, you meet the physical limits of moving modern war machines. You cannot magically teleport thousands of tons of equipment across hostile terrain without roads that can carry them and systems that keep them repaired. So, you've crossed an ocean, and you arrive at a handful of bottlenecks, funnels that turn your massive invasion into a line. And lines are fragile. Lines snap. Okay, you think. Fine. Skip the direct landing. Use the neighbors. Approach by land. Clever. Indirect. Classic. So you look north. Canada. On a map, it looks like an open door. Enormous landmass. Border stretching forever. And huge areas that look empty. And that's exactly the problem. Much of Canada's vastness isn't empty like a parking lot. It's empty like a wilderness that resists movement. Sparse roads, huge distances between logistical nodes, harsh weather, terrain that punishes vehicles and people. You don't just drive an army through it like it's a highway in a video game. You need routes that can sustain fuel delivery, repair, medical evacuation, and continuous reinforcement. And even if you land in a Canadian coastal city to move south, you still face the basic fact that pushing massive forces across long distances requires infrastructure that was never built for that purpose. Plus, you've now added a new task. You must secure Canada, too. You've widened your mission. You've created more front, more responsibilities, more resistance. And every extra mile you control is another mile you must guard forever. So you look south, Mexico, and the map tempts you again. Land, roads, access, but the geography doesn't cooperate. Vast deserts and harsh environments dominate key approaches. Heat, water scarcity, long stretches between major hubs. You can't just improvise water. You can't wish fuel into existence. And when you finally cross the border, you're not suddenly in the American center. You're in the outer layers, regions that are huge, spread out, and difficult to dominate quickly. You don't get to skip distance. You inherit it. So whether you come from the north or the south, the same ugly truth returns. Your supply line becomes a rope stretched across a continent, and stretched ropes break. Now, let's assume you've done the impossible again. You've landed, you've pushed inland, and you've established some kind of foothold. You tell your staff, now the real campaign begins. That statement is correct, but not in the way you think, because now you meet the internal walls. From the west, the land rises into a massive spine of mountains and elevated terrain that fractures movement into predictable routes. From the east, dense ridges and forests create their own maze. Mountains aren't just tall rocks. They are route control machines. They force you into passes, corridors, tunnels, bridges, and narrow highways. They decide where your vehicles can go. They decide where your supply trucks must travel. They decide where you can be ambushed. And predictable movement is a gift to defenders. If the defender knows you must use a small number of critical routes, they don't need to defeat your whole army. They only need to disrupt the few arteries you rely on. Suddenly, your force isn't advancing. It's idling, waiting, burning fuel while not moving, bleeding time, bleeding morale, bleeding spare parts. And the farther you push, the worse it gets. Your maintenance backlog grows, your vehicles degrade, your people wear down. Every mile inland is another mile your supplies must travel through hostile territory. This is where invasions go to die, not because the invader is weak, but because the math turns against them. Now, pause, because we've been talking about land like it's the main character. It isn't. The main character is the population. In a normal war, you defeat an army and you inherit a state, a chain of command, a bureaucracy, a system that can be captured and reused. The United States is not built like that. It's a federation, power spread across states, counties, cities, and institutions. Even if you seize a Capitol building and hold a few major cities, the country doesn't switch off. It fragments. It decentralizes. It becomes 1,000 separate problems instead of one. And here's the part that should make you sit up straight. The sheer scale of the population, combined with the culture of independence and local identity, creates a resistance nightmare. You are not fighting a single organized opponent. You are facing millions of potential points of defiance, some coordinated, many not, which makes it worse, not better, because chaos is hard to control. Add to that a reality that outsiders often underestimate. Civilian arms ownership in the United States is enormous. Even if you ignore politics and focus purely on practical consequences, it means an invader can't assume civilians are helpless. It means any occupation is instantly more dangerous, more expensive, and more paranoid. And it's not just guns. It's knowledge. There are millions of people with familiarity in hunting, survival, local terrain, and community networks. There are also millions of veterans and people with professional experience in logistics, engineering, communications, and emergency response. In other words, the skills that turn resistance from symbolic into effective. You could have the best conventional army on Earth and still struggle to control a country where resistance can be local, mobile, and constant. Because occupying a hostile population is a numbers game. You need a huge presence to police roads, guard infrastructure, defend supply lines, and maintain basic order. That means millions of troops, not hundreds of thousands. And that raises a brutal question. Do you even have enough people to hold what you take? For most countries, the answer is no. And even if the answer is yes, the cost becomes ridiculous. Now, let's talk about the infrastructure trap. At first glance, the United States looks like the perfect prize. Highways, rail, ports, pipelines, power grids, enormous agriculture, advanced industry. But conquest doesn't work like buying a company. You don't just acquire assets and enjoy the profits. In war, infrastructure is either cooperative or contested, and contested infrastructure becomes fragile. The U.S. transportation system is vast, but it depends on nodes, bridges, interchanges, rail yards, tunnels, switching systems, distribution centers. A modern society runs on synchronization. When the synchronization breaks, efficiency collapses. That's why the deeper you go, the less usable the country becomes to you. Not because the infrastructure is bad, but because it was never built to function while being occupied by an enemy. So you might take a city and find that the systems you need, fuel distribution, spare parts, pipelines, communications, even basic municipal operations, don't serve you automatically. People stop cooperating, work slows, errors multiply, deliveries don't arrive, machines fail, and every failure forces you to dedicate more troops to guarding, repairing, and controlling. Troops you don't have. Then there's the sheer size problem again. In a small country, you can control a few hubs and influence the whole territory. In the United States, you can control a few hubs and still be thousands of miles away from the next problem. It's like trying to hold a continent with handfuls of sand. And just when you think it can't get worse, the global economy walks into the room. Because invading the United States isn't like invading a random country on the periphery of world trade. The US sits inside the system like a central gear. The dollar underpins global finance. American markets connect to global liquidity. American technology infrastructure supports much of the world's digital operations. American supply chains touch everything from medicine to semiconductors. So, if you destabilize the United States to the point of collapse, you don't get a clean victory. You get global financial panic, trade disruption, currency shocks, massive uncertainty about pricing, contracts, and reserves. The knock-on effects aren't just painful for America, they're painful for you. Even if you hate the US, you probably still rely on a world where payments clear, trade routes function, and your banks aren't set on fire by market chaos. It becomes the ultimate strategic irony. The more successful your invasion is, the more you damage the system that your own country depends on to remain stable. You don't just conquer a nation. You risk detonating the economic environment that keeps your own regime alive. And finally, let's say you're still committed. You've accepted the costs. You've accepted the chaos. You've accepted the resistance. Now comes the last wall, governance. You can break things faster than you can run them. It's easy to destroy. It's hard to administer. The US is an administrative maze. Layered laws, state authority, local enforcement, courts, agencies, private companies that operate critical infrastructure, and thousands of local governments with their own loyalties and functions. Many systems aren't even centralized enough to be captured cleanly. They're distributed by design and by history. So even if you claim the title of occupier, you inherit an impossible job. You must force a gigantic, diverse, stubborn, decentralized society to function for you while it resents you. That's not conquest. That's an endless drain. And the longer you stay, the worse the math becomes, because resistance doesn't need to defeat you outright. It only needs to make the occupation unprofitable, unmanageable, and exhausting. Which brings us to the final truth. Invading the United States isn't just difficult militarily. It's structurally hostile to the idea of invasion. The oceans impose distance. The continent imposes scale. The terrain shapes movement. The infrastructure becomes a trap. The population decentralizes resistance. The economy punishes disruption. And the political structure refuses to fold into a single point of control. Even in a fantasy where the US military disappears, you don't get an easy victory. You get a grinding, expensive, humiliating struggle against reality itself. So, if you're a would-be conqueror staring at the map in 2030, here's the conclusion your advisors won't want to say out loud. The United States is less a target and more a geographic and economic fortress that weaponizes distance, complexity, and scale against anyone who tries to occupy it. It's not invincible because of one weapon system. It's invincible because it's too big, too far, too connected, too stubborn, and too structurally resistant to being held. And that's why, even with all the ships, all the soldiers, and all the political will, the invasion you ordered doesn't become your greatest triumph. It becomes your greatest mistake. If you enjoyed this kind of dark, realistic thought experiment, where we strip away the Hollywood myths and look at the cold mechanics underneath, hit like, subscribe, and tell me this. If someone had to try anyway, what region would be the worst place to get stuck? and why? The mountains? The deserts? The endless distances? Drop your answer below, and I'll read the best ones. Thanks for watching. Stay sharp